right. So this episode is just going to be me talking about my pregnancy journey because I am a very open stoner scientist. I was a daily consumer of cannabis. I used pretty high doses of cannabis, and I want to tell you about my journey because it's also been really weird. I found out about a condition that I have that is genetic, that is really not studied a lot. And since it's about to be June, June is ICP Awareness Month, and this is the condition that I have that I want to talk about during this episode. I want to talk about tapering down my dose of cannabis, using for medical reasons. And then in future episodes, we're going to talk more about the actual research that has occurred regarding cannabis and pregnancy, cannabis and breastfeeding. The next episode, we're going to have Dr. Michelle Ross on, who is a neuroscientist. And then hopefully future episodes will also have MDs and other researchers to talk about this subject. But it's a super, I've never talked too much about cannabis and pregnancy. I've done one episode on it, but I always knew that there was just so much nuance that you just don't understand if you have not been through it. And I am so glad that I have not talked about it a lot because my perception of pregnancy was so different than the reality. It really is an amazing, beautiful process that I'll talk more about in the end, but it is also like the scariest, most anxiety ridden time, at least of my life. And I think part of this too is that I haven't been consuming cannabis daily, and that is part of what I use for like mental health and medicine. So let's first dive into finding out I was pregnant because I wear an Oura ring. I'm actually not wearing one now, but an Oura ring is a biometric tracker. So it's able to track your heart rate. It's able to track how active you are during the day, your sleep and how well you're sleeping, how many hours, how much REM sleep you got, all of that. And it's also paired with another app called Natural Cycles, and that app can be used as an FDA approved method of birth control. So it's able to tell you based on your body temperature, essentially if you're fertile, if you're not fertile, blah, 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 and also like if you're pregnant. So I wore an Oura ring pretty much every day. I was tracking all my metrics. We weren't necessarily like trying for a baby, but essentially when it became 2025, we're like, hey, I feel like we're pretty ready at this time in our life. So if it happens, it happens. Great. It literally happened in January, the first month. So I noticed right away that my body temperature changed via my Oura ring. And then I was like, oh man, I don't know what that means, but I've never seen that before. So, of course, then I got a pregnancy test, tested, and it was positive. So something that nobody ever talks about is like, what do you do once you get a positive pregnancy test? So I remember I called my doctor and I'm like, hey, like, I just got a positive pregnancy test. What do I do? And they're like, oh, you just wait for like I think it was like 8 weeks, and they just like make you wait it out. You don't see a provider, at least where I am. We didn't see a provider. We didn't talk to anyone. It was just like, okay, like let us know what happens and we'll make this appointment for you like way in the future. So we're like, okay, like this is kind of nerve-wracking if you've never been through this before. Like I always thought that you would talk to a medical professional, but we didn't. So I find out in early January that I'm pregnant, and obviously I was consuming a lot. So I kind of consumed whenever I wanted to. I use cannabis as a productivity tool, meaning if I need to write a paper, if I need to go to meetings, if I need to, create a new educational diagram, if I need to do any of these things, I would literally dab during the day, like all day long, just take these like small dabs throughout the day as a productivity tool. At night, I would always roll up and, smoke a J. I love dry herb vaping. I use pretty much every consumption method. So when I actually got pregnant, I was like, okay, I'm not going to stop cold turkey. I don't think of cannabis as a poison. Like if I was a heavy alcohol consumer, which I wasn't consuming any alcohol at the time, but if I was a heavy alcohol consumer, I probably would have thought differently about that because alcohol literally acts as a toxin in your body. But cannabis, I knew that I shouldn't be consuming as much as I was because that likely is not good for a developing baby. We are making a brain, we are making organs, we're making this beautiful human being in our body, and I didn't want my consumption to influence what that baby's brain was going to be like. But at the same time, I realized that I found out very early I was pregnant, and at this time the baby was like, a tiny little clump of cells. Like that, at that point I was not worried at all that my consumption was going to affect this child. So I said, okay, I'm going to take my mental health into consideration here, and I'm going to take a few weeks and taper down. So I've got a lot of questions on what does that look like? What does tapering down look like? And I think this could look different for everyone based on how you consume, how often you consume, etc. But for me, it really started with, instead of just consuming like as a productivity tool pretty much whenever I wanted to, I mean, it's literally like part of my job. A lot of the things that I do, consumption is just part of it. So instead of just consuming like at any time that I wanted to, I started to consume really only when my body was telling me that it wanted to. So a lot of times, like right before bed, or during the day, if I was feeling anxious and overwhelmed and I had a lot going on, I would consume, and I would start by only consuming the times that I wanted to. So that was the first step of tapering down. And then of course the second part was turning down my THC dose. So I'm usually a high THC consumer. I mean, I grow my own cannabis and I try to look for more balanced varieties, but I'm usually not like smoking straight up CBD. I'll kind of mix it in. So I started mixing in a lot more CBD to start cutting down that dose of THC. So I might still like smoke a joint, but maybe it'd be half CBD flower, half THC flower for a few days, and then maybe 3/4 CBD flower, 1/4 THC flower. Also, if you roll your own joints, start rolling pinners instead of like real fat joints. Just start making them smaller and smaller. You can also, if you like to pack cones, packing like a dog walker cone instead of a full 1 gram cone, And then something we'll talk about more in future episodes is there is a lot of data that smoking in general is bad for the baby. It's honestly, smoking in general is thought of as pretty bad as far as like your health goes and consumption methods. Of course, there are some benefits of smoking that other consumption methods don't have, but I'm also somebody who loves dry herb vaping. So I said, okay, I'm going to try to smoke less and to dry herb vape more. So I have multiple dry herb vapes. I have tabletop ones, I have kind of medium-sized ones, and then I have a one-hitter dry herb vape. So this is actually the consumption method that I've used throughout pregnancy. I've only had to consume probably less than 5 times throughout my entire pregnancy after I tapered down. So, and it was strictly for medical reasons, and I'll talk about that more in a second. But these one-hitter dry herb vapes, I chose this because I wanted to use flower. I grow my own flower, or I get flower from people that I trust a lot, whereas a lot of concentrates or vapes that are oils or even edibles, if I don't see the product that goes into them, I'm not really comfortable consuming that because I don't know what the process was for cultivation, for processing, for extraction, for all of that stuff. So I don't want to use things that I don't know what are in. And this is kind of my rules in general when looking for quality products. I love to see input material, and I love with flour to be able to, know exactly what went into that product, and not just cultivation, not just nutrients, but also like the love that somebody puts into a product. And you guys know I'm pretty spiritual and hippie. And I do think that this is a big part of it. The cultivator who's growing it, like how much they actually care about that plant, how much they actually care about the patients and the people that are consuming that plant. So I really wanted to use a method of consuming flower. So of course, when we're thinking about flower, you can either smoke it, dry herb vape it, or then you can always just make your own products too, like edibles or extracts. But for me, these one-hitter dry herb vapes, I got mine from Dynavap. I'll show a picture on the screen here if you're watching on YouTube. You can also see my cute little bump if you're watching on YouTube. I usually don't show my bump in a lot of pictures because I think people are really kind of creepy towards pregnant women, which is just a topic for another day. But the comments people make are so out of pocket. It's weird. Like I've been taken back a couple of times where I'm like, did you just say that to me? That's so weird. And also just never touch me. You're never allowed to touch me, but that's just my preference. Okay, so I use the Dynavap one hitter dry herb vape. And essentially what this is, it's like a metal tube with a container at the end. You fill it up. It's only a tiny bit of flour, and then you put like a cap over it. Then you heat it all around, and then you inhale. And when it's up to temperature, so it's ready to inhale, you're gonna hear a click, like, and that click is actually the two metal pieces coming together at the dry herb vape temperature that says that this is ready to be vaporized. So what I love about it is it's a really small dose, and you can always take multiple of these, dry herb vape hits if you need more of it. But this is kind of what titrating's all about, is finding your therapeutic minimum dose. So for me, it was, honestly, because my tolerance dropped so quickly when I tapered down and then just stopped consuming during pregnancy, my tolerance was so low that even one of these dry herb vapes would work miraculously for me. So I didn't really need to consume cannabis. I wasn't nauseous during the first trimester almost at all, but I did have a few migraines that were actually worse than any other migraine I've ever had in my life. And maybe that's because I'm usually able to medicate pretty quickly with them. But, you have this like sense of anxiety when you're pregnant where you don't want to, like, I wouldn't take Zofran. I trust cannabis more than Zofran any day, especially for helping with migraines and helping with the symptoms that I'm looking for. So for me, it was like I would kind of try to wait it out, probably a little too long. I'd be like, okay, is this migraine going to go away? And it would be like 2 to 3 days of constant migraine symptoms. And I'd try a few different things. They usually didn't work. It was clearly like hormonal. And by the second or third day, I was like, okay, I really need to like do something about this. So I would start using cannabis, and usually that would at the very least resolve my symptoms enough to like allow me to eat and drink water and like kind of bring my body back to a healthy state, which is something I don't think we talk enough about when we're talking about cannabis and pregnancy. Is whether you're talking about mental health issues, whether you're talking about being able to keep food down or keep water down, or just like your stress levels in general, all of these things can be just as harmful to a baby as, I think people are a little too worried about low doses of cannabis. If it's improving your quality of life to that level and allowing you to be, to have nutrients in your body and allowing you to actually produce like happy molecules in your brain, that is going to definitely outweigh the negative effects of not consuming. But of course, this is a very personal journey. So I think everybody is going to have a different kind of mental battle about whether to consume or not to consume. As I mentioned before, like, I don't think that cannabis is toxic. I don't think cannabis is a poison. I think it's just something that we really need to lock in on dosing and treat it as a medicine. I've been creating a ton of content on social media about cannabis and pregnancy. And one of the things that I noticed the most is people don't treat cannabis like a medicine. And I know that people are like, duh, Riley. Like, we know this. We know this from seeing what happens to our medical communities when it switches to strictly recreational or adult use in some of these states. But, there's so many comments like, if you can't put down cannabis for 9 months, you shouldn't be having kids, or like, just these really radical comments. And it's like, do people forget that there's actually people consuming cannabis as a medicine, like to actually help them through this extremely stressful process in your life when your body's changing, your mind's changing, your priorities are changing, so much is changing, and a lot of people are using it as a medicine. I'm really happy that I got my medical cannabis card prior to getting pregnant because, I mean, one, it allows me to talk about it with a lot more comfortability, that knowing that like there is some additional protection if you are a medical cannabis consumer. So I would highly recommend that if anyone is a medical cannabis consumer and you don't have your card yet, get your card before you get pregnant because it can help protect you in some ways that even if it's just like for peace of mind in your brain. During the first trimester, like I've taken tolerance breaks before, almost just as like a self experiment. And I remember sleep was always the hardest part of tolerance breaks. I remember trying to fall asleep for like 2, 4, 6 hours and just laying wide awake in bed, just being like, I'm never going to get tired. My brain is never going to shut off. And that was actually something that I was scared about with tapering down and then eventually stopping using cannabis. I was like, am I going to be able to sleep? Because sleep is medicine as well. So I was kind of worried about that. But I was pleasantly surprised that I slept really well despite tapering off and then stopping using cannabis. And I think it's just because my body was so exhausted during that first trimester. Like you just feel this like heavy weighted blanket on you. Again, your body's like using a lot of energy to produce a human being. So you have a little bit less energy. And when it came to bedtime every night, I would knock out so quickly. This eventually changed, which is a little bit of a premonition on what's about to happen in this story. But I will also say one of the kind of difficult things with, at least in my journey with not using cannabis, is it's almost like you feel like you lost a friend. Because, I mean, cannabis, I wouldn't even say it was like my crutch. It was just something that was part of my life. It's my whole job. It's half of my personality. It's one of my like best friends is consuming cannabis. It's always been there with me through every stage of my life. And when I stopped using cannabis, it was kind of this weird, empty void feeling, which I really wasn't expecting a lot. So that was mentally really difficult for me to, not have that as part of my life for the first time, literally since I was 14 years old. And I will say something that really, really, really helped me through this journey is my partner, my husband, Jake. He stopped consuming all substances too during pregnancy. So no alcohol, no nicotine, no cannabis, no anything. And this is not something I'm like, only good partners stop using whatever. I don't care. Like, you do you do what's best for you. There, again, are a lot of medical consumers where your partner shouldn't stop. But in my case, it was so helpful not to see somebody smoking all day long in front of me, or even like having rolling papers out and a grinder and just like that constant reminder of what you aren't doing and can't have at that moment. So, again, I don't think that every partner needs to stop consuming at all, but I am so thankful for him for stopping because it really has made not only the process easier, but has made us so much closer during this journey because we all have things that we rely on. We all have, things that we do when we're stressed out, and to almost rely on each other, rely on conversation, rely on just like really grassroots methods of healing and conversation to get through things. It is super helpful. And like it's a stressful time for everyone, going through pregnancy. There's a lot that's on your mind that's never been on your mind before. And going through that together, especially, I ended up being a high risk pregnancy, and both of us kind of being on that same mental plane was extremely, extremely, extremely helpful. So kind of just a shout out to Jake for just being the best partner ever. Obviously you got to be careful who you choose to have children with. And I just couldn't be happier with my relationship, my husband, and he's just made it so much easier. So also, I don't know if people know this either. I didn't know this before getting pregnant, but you can find out the gender of your child. I didn't know that. But you can find out the gender via blood test, right? So it's called NIPT testing, and it's not only testing for gender, it's also testing for chromosomal abnormalities and a few other genetic abnormalities that you may want to be aware of really early in pregnancy. So you get tested for this, I believe it's at 11 weeks, and you can find out the gender, which of course, like, I know not everyone wants to know, but it's literally living inside of me. I would love to know what gender the child is. So we found out early, and when they take the blood test for the NIPT testing, it's like 10 vials of blood. It is so much blood, and nobody ever told me that. They just kept ripping off these vials, and I'm like, dude, are you almost done? Like, can you start counting down or something? Like, this is getting pretty aggressive. And again, like, I understand that each of these tests requires some blood, so like, of course it takes a lot, but I wasn't expecting that. And honestly, one of the craziest things is everyone would be like, oh, like, do you know if you're having a girl or a boy, blah, blah, blah. And people would be like, I feel like Jake would be a great girl dad, blah, 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 all this stuff. And I'm like, I don't want to sound again too like hippie and more like too in touch with my body, but I just know I'm having a boy. I don't know why. There's just something that in my brain, in my body, I just knew it was a boy. And this isn't some sort of like boy supremacy thing where I'm like, I want to be a boy mom. If I ever have boy mom in my profile, just delete me off of social media. But I just knew based on how I was feeling and just this like really deep internal feeling that I was having a boy. And then when we got the results back, it was a boy. And I was like, that's kind of crazy. And my husband said the same thing. He's like, I don't want this to come off the wrong way, but I just feel like we're having a boy. So it was so weird that both of us had this like really deep internal feeling, and we were right about it. And honestly, a few other people in our life were like, I just feel this like aura coming from you. So we found out very early. We, both my husband and I create content on social media, but not like this kind of content. So we had just like a very cute gender reveal where my good friend, who's also, I'm in my office now recording this video, and next to this office is my friend Lanka, who owns a bakery, and she baked us this gorgeous chocolate cake, and then in the middle of it, we gave her the envelope, and we're like, can you either put like pink or blue frosting on the inside? And it was just Jake and I, and we just did like a cake cutting at home, and that's how we found out that we were having a boy. So that was cute. But then things took a little bit of a turn. So now I'm going to kind of get into why I was a high risk pregnancy and kind of all of the things that have happened since then. Because talk about mental stressors, like, pregnancy is already stressful, and then you become this weird medical patient that nobody knows anything about. And also, this is not my first time being called a medical anomaly and being like this strange thing that physicians knew nothing about. When I was younger, I had seizures multiple times, and they could never figure out what kind of seizure, what was causing the seizures. They were just kind of like, oh, like, you're just kind of this weird medical phenomenon. And that happened again. Around 20 weeks, you have an anatomy scan. So they're like measuring the baby from like head to toe, and they're measuring all of these, like looking for nose, looking for 5 fingers and 5 toes, and like all of these different anatomy things to make sure that the baby's developing correctly. And that went perfect. Okay. They were like, okay, baby's developing perfect, looks perfect on the anatomy scan. You're good. So I went home, and probably a week to a week and a half after that, I started to get itchy. My body just started itching. And, you Google a little bit, and it's like, 23% of people experience itching during their pregnancy. So I was like, oh, chill, whatever. Like, this happens to a lot of people. And it first started like on my thighs, like, nowhere crazy. And it was getting pretty itchy. So I called, and I'm like, hey, I'm feeling pretty itchy. Like, anything you guys recommend? And they're like, oh, no, just like wait it out. It's fine. And then it got so bad that I was like, I want to itch my skin off. Like, this is getting really, really bad. And I called again, and, they prescribed me like a steroid cream, and that didn't work very well. But Then I had to schedule another appointment because I said, okay, this itching is getting worse. It's on the palms of my hands, the soles of my feet, and like periodically just all over my body. And so I had this kind of emergency OBGYN appointment, and I go in and I'm talking to the physician, and he's like, oh, like, I don't know what this could be, blah, 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 blah. But I had just seen a video on TikTok because I was doing research on like PubMed, but I was also looking on TikTok. I was looking on Reddit. I was looking like on all of these other forums and being like, crazy itchiness during pregnancy. And specifically when it starts on your hands and your feet, it's an indicator of this condition called ICP, or Intrahepatic Cholestasis of Pregnancy. So ICP is essentially a condition where when your hormone levels spike during pregnancy, your body is not able to process bile acids in the same way that it previously could. So this causes a lot of stress on the liver, and then of course causes a buildup of bile acids in the blood, and that's what can become toxic to the baby. It actually doesn't really have any significant harm to the mom. And there just happens to be a huge influencer on TikTok called Mama Jill. She has like millions of followers who has ICP. And she has created content on this talking about what ICP is, her symptoms, her blood test, all of this different stuff. So when I went into this OBGYN appointment, I said, listen, I understand that this is still like kind of a mystery. You don't know what's happening here. But I would really like to get these blood tests to see if my bile levels are elevated, because that's the main indicator of cholestasis, or if my liver enzymes are elevated, because that's kind of like a secondary indicator of cholestasis. And they're like, we probably don't need that, but like you're getting more blood taken today anyway, so why don't you go and get these things tested? I said, great. So went and got that blood test. They take like over a week to get back. They have to be sent to this lab in like Michigan or Wisconsin or something. And it's a pretty long turnaround time. And when we finally got those results back, my levels were so elevated. And just for kind of comparison here, a normal healthy person, their bile acid levels in their body and their blood would be between 0 and 10. My levels were at 147. Anything over 100 is considered very serious because it's not harmful to me at all, other than, of course, I'm uncomfortable because I'm so itchy. But when you have that much bile acids moving through your blood and your body, obviously your blood's also now feeding a baby. And if that bile acid levels gets too high, it can be really harmful to the baby. So trigger warning here, I'm going to talk about something that is very uncomfortable for a lot of people. So if you've struggled with pregnancy issues in the past, skip forward. But if those bile acid levels get really high and they don't lower, your risk of stillbirth goes up substantially. They don't know exactly how much, at least tenfold, that your risk of stillbirth goes up because your blood is literally toxic to your baby. So first of all, they're like, oh my gosh, we've never seen levels this high this early in pregnancy, because this condition usually presents itself at like 34 weeks, 32 weeks, like much later in pregnancy. So immediately they're like freaking out, which of course makes me freak out. I'm like, what do you mean you've never seen this? So at that point, I was switched to a different physician at Dartmouth Hitchcock in New Hampshire. And I live in New Hampshire, and I was so thankful to have Dartmouth as a resource for us in New Hampshire because, I got to give my OB props because they knew they didn't have the resources to figure this out. And Dartmouth has 5 high-risk OBGYNs that work as a team to try to get you the best care possible. So I immediately got switched for all my appointments to be at Dartmouth instead of where my other OBGYN was located. And essentially, there's a lot of things that can make you kind of predisposed to this condition. Mine, first of all, is genetic because my mother had ICP with all of her pregnancies, which she never mentioned to me. And she's like, oh, you kind of just forget about pregnancy when you kind of move on. I'm like, yeah, I don't think I'd ever forget about this. But anyway, they didn't even really have a name for it when she had ICP because they just called it like itchiness during pregnancy, and they didn't know that it was so high risk and so much of an issue. So we have a lot more data on that now. And because mine presented so early, they're like, we don't know what this means as far as the risk to your baby. So again, talk about mental health stressors. I'm like this weird case where this is already a condition that's associated with increased risk of stillbirth. And I'm super early in my pregnancy. I still have half of my pregnancy to go with this in the back of my mind of like, we don't know what's going to happen. That's like extremely, extremely scary. So I definitely cried more than I've ever cried in my life during this time. You know, my husband and I were just like kind of freaking out for a while. And I will also note that I mentioned that genetic susceptibility is definitely one part of it. And then another part of that is also having twins. And I am not pregnant with twins right now, but this pregnancy started off as twins. So, and this is like, I'm not sad about this. This is something that happens actually with more pregnancies than they talk about. It's called vanishing twins. And really early on my pregnancy, it started out as twins. And then essentially my body said, no, we're not doing that. And vaporized one of them, just deleted. And I would have never known about this, but at my first ultrasound, there was still the remnants of an amniotic sac there. So there was like one empty amniotic sac and then one with a baby in it. And I was like, yeah, what is that? And then again, they kind of talked me through it. They said this isn't super uncommon, but like it is a little uncommon that your body hasn't gotten rid of this yet. So part of what I think made my ICP so much worse is that it did start as twins and I was genetically susceptible to this. And I will be genetically susceptible with any pregnancy that I have in the future. So, of course, the next question is, what do they do about it? What's the treatment for this, etc.? And the treatment for it, there's only one medication that they routinely use, and it's called ursodiol. If anybody out there is a biology, wildlife kind of person, ursa comes from the Latin name for bear. And diol is just part of like what that molecule looks like. And this is a really cool story on, like, if you guys don't know, my husband's a wildlife biologist. I'm a natural product chemist. And this medication is like a perfect integration of both of our backgrounds because this medication comes from essentially studying traditional Chinese medicine and how a lot of traditional liver ailments in Chinese cultures were solved by ingesting either bear bile or bear liver that has bear bile acids in it as part of this treatment for these liver conditions. So the way that we learned about ursodiol was studying traditional Chinese medicine. And essentially, like, bears can hibernate for a really long time and not have a toxic buildup of bile in their body, which researchers were like, how could that possibly be? So researching that and then kind of creating a synthetic form of bear bile acids, we came up with this medication called ursodiol. And it's so funny because everyone's always like, oh, we don't know enough about cannabis. We don't know how it works in the body. And when we went to this OBGYN and they're prescribing me this medication, I'm like, okay, great. Happy to take that. Hope it works. How does it work, by the way? What's the mechanism? And they're like, oh, we have no idea. We just know it works for some people. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting, but I'll try it. And then they told me that this medication only helps with symptoms of ICP. So helping with the itchiness, helping, make you feel better, but there isn't a ton of evidence that it actually helps lower your bile acid levels. So again, I'm freaking out because my next blood test showed that my bile acid levels actually went up. So I started taking ursodiol and they went from 147 to 159. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is not good. They're still rising. I'm becoming like even more toxic. Like this is heartbreaking. But my liver enzymes started to look better. So again, just to give you perspective on how bad this condition was with me, typically some of these liver enzyme levels are like between 0 and 30 or 0 and 50. My levels were 600 and something and 300 and something. And what those liver enzyme levels mean is that your liver is stressed out. It's like producing too many of these enzymes because it's trying to compensate for not being able to process them. So my liver's in overdrive. My body's super itchy. My body's uncomfortable. I start taking this medication. These liver enzyme levels have dropped about half, actually, about 50% reduction after I'm on this medication for about 2 weeks or probably a week and a half. But my bile acids still go up. So I'm like, okay, maybe it's working. Maybe it's not. I think I feel a little bit better. But then I go back in for more testing just a couple weeks later. And at this point, I've been on ursodiol for almost a month, probably 3 weeks. And this just happened. Like, I just got these results back yesterday. So I was like, I need to record this podcast because I want to share this good news with the world. So I just got more lab results back. And the liver enzymes that started at like 600 and then 300, they're now at 35, which is almost in the normal range. And then the other one is actually in the normal range. So liver enzymes are back to like a really healthy level. And my bile acids dropped from 159 to 13. 13. Which is crazy because they told me that this medication probably won't lower my bile acids, that nothing's going to work to lower it. And now again, talk about being a medical anomaly. I have now dropped like an insane amount in just a couple of weeks. So the normal range again is 0 to 10. My levels are 13. I'm almost back to that like normal healthy level. So of course we're still monitoring. We're still concerned to a certain level because you're considered high risk if your levels were ever over 100. But my whole team is like, dude, what's going on with your body? We have no idea. So I do want to talk about some of the things that I've been doing other than taking ursodiol that may have contributed to lowering these bile acid levels, and also some of the things that I've done to make me more comfortable during my super, super, super itchy time. So other than taking the medication ursodiol, I've also been drinking a ton of lemon water, especially first thing in the morning. I will chug a huge glass of lemon water. And then I've also been drinking dandelion root tea. So there's a lot of evidence, and again, traditional Chinese medicine and pharmacognosy, that dandelion roots can help get bile acids moving in your body, just get bile moving better. So because it's really safe in general to use, that's one of the herbs that I chose to use kind of in companionship with ursodiol. So I'll have one cup of dandelion root tea, and I usually put ginger and lemon in that as well, maybe a little bit of honey. I've reduced the amount of dairy that I'm eating because fatty things in general just make your body work harder with producing more bile acids. And I've met with a liver specialist, I've met with a geneticist, and of course I've met with these high-risk OBGYNs, and I've asked them about diet, and every time they're like, there's really nothing you can do to change your diet substantially that's going to help with this condition. But I always figured like consuming a little bit less fat would probably be a good thing. But I also told them about my diet and how healthy I eat in general, and they're like, oh, I think you're fine. Like you eat extremely healthy, which I really do. I like to cook all my meals at home. I like to eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, et cetera, et cetera. So my condition is a lot better, but during the peak of it, when I was at my itchiest, I cannot even explain how itchy this itchy feeling is. And this isn't like a bug bite itch. This isn't like a, oops, oh, got it. Like, great, I'll be good for another, 20 minutes before I might itch it again. This is like your blood being toxic. Like you are so itchy everywhere and your blood's just circulating. So it's like this deep, deep, deep itchy feeling. And that itchy feeling, it almost feels like itch is like bubbling out of your skin and you cannot itch it hard enough. I literally had sores over my whole body, over my legs and my back and my arms, just from itching so much. I would stay up until literally 8 a.m. because this itching gets worse in the middle of the night. So I would stay up all night itching and then maybe fall asleep around 8 a.m., like 8 to 10, 8 to 11. I'd get a little bit of sleep because the itching would subside. But during the night, I was sleeping with cold socks on. So they're literally like socks that you keep in the freezer and you put on your feet. And then when those would get warm, I would switch them out with ice packs like throughout the night. I'd wear silk pajamas because you don't want your skin to touch skin when you're itchy because it just makes you more itchy. So I had this full set of silk pajamas. I was wearing these ice packs on my feet. I was using this lotion called Sarna anti-itch lotion, which actually helped a lot, but you had to put that on your whole body multiple times a day. And every night I would do Epsom salt baths on my feet, which actually helped a lot, but only kind of temporarily. It would help for a few hours. And then also just not taking really hot showers or baths because hot things in general would make this so much worse. But I can't even use words to describe how bad this itching was. It ruined my quality of life. It ruined my mental health. I was just an absolute corpse of a human for the few weeks that this was really, really bad. And I feel so bad for the women who have ICP, that ursodiol is not working, that nothing works for them because they go through this for weeks and weeks and weeks of pregnancy with no help at all. So I'm not trying to like scare anyone about pregnancy, but I do think that this condition needs to be talked about more. And I'm so thankful for people talking about it on social media and talking about it on Reddit threads. And for these other, there's a Facebook group called ICP Care. And this Facebook group has been so helpful with talking. There's over 20,000 women. Everyone's talking about things that have helped them or their levels or when they got induced, et cetera, because even though my levels are better, I probably will still need to be induced early because the chances of stillbirth go up after week 36. So when my levels were really, really high, they were like, we're going to have to induce you like as early as 34 weeks, which again, mental health, siren, absolutely collapsed. I'm like, 34 weeks? Like, that is so insanely early. Like I can't imagine. And I just would spiral just thinking about that. But now that my levels are better, my care team is like so much more relaxed. And they're like, okay, well, we can continue to monitor these levels. We don't need to induce at 34 weeks if it stays this way. We can just continue to monitor you. And if you and baby are healthy, we can push that much further. But I likely still will need to be induced rather than just waiting, for natural labor to happen, which I'm okay with. My mentality has really shifted that all I want is a healthy baby. You care so much about this baby more than you can even imagine while you're pregnant, especially like, this is my first time pregnant and it's so much more than what I ever thought it would be. I feel so connected to this baby and like especially when it starts moving, like it's so precious. Like I now think of pregnant women so differently. I used to think of pregnant women as like this static figure, and now I'm like, oh no, it's like there's a baby moving in there and kicking and like I don't know, you just feel so different about it. So all I want is a healthy baby, and this has been a insane mental battle. But I will also say, like, kind of going back to cannabis and pregnancy, we always talk about the things that are harmful to a baby during pregnancy. Don't drink too much caffeine. Don't use cannabis. Don't use pharmaceutical medications. Don't be around secondhand smoke. Don't blah, 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 blah. Don't. But like, we should also talk about what we should do more. And like, even doing things like I've been painting a lot more. I've been gardening every day. I've been going for walks and just doing things that do make you happy. Producing those happy molecules is just as beneficial, and it's a medicine in itself during pregnancy to really prioritize your mental health and to try to do anything that you can to make yourself feel better, because you are producing, molecules in your brain that are going to be sent to your baby when you are happy and you're thriving and you're creative and you're just, feeling full. And I got to say, I'm like so thankful for some of my friends during this pregnancy journey, I've definitely become closer to certain groups of friends and a bit further from other groups of friends because, obviously I'm creating content on social media. So if I make a video and I'm like, hey, here's an update, I'll get a lot of texts from people. But, of course, that's like, I kind of put that out into the world. But I'm super thankful for, friends who have dropped off food or just like checked in on me when I'm not putting things out into the world. And just like those relationships, you just will remember for the rest of your life. And I'm just so insanely thankful for having the group of people around me that I do and not expecting me to like be as productive as normal during this really hard time or like, all of these different things. I work with Dr. Miyabi Shields. I'm super thankful for them for just being lenient with me too and being like, I can't make the morning meetings. Like I didn't sleep last night or just, I can't make this conference because, I have 10 OBGYN appointments. Although I still have spoke at 3 different conferences during this pregnancy. And I really wanted to stay active within the cannabis community during this pregnancy because I feel like I never see pregnant women ever at cannabis events. And I don't mean like consumption events. I mean like educational events, community events. So I wanted to make sure that I was like showing up and also being like, hey, we don't die. Like we don't just drop off the face of the earth when we get pregnant. We're still people. We're still part of this community. We still want to talk to our friends. So it is still important to me to show up to as many things as I can. But again, I'm just so thankful for the friends that I have for being here with me the whole time. So other than having this super rare condition, I've actually really enjoyed pregnancy, which when I tell my husband this, he's like laughing in my face because he's like, Riley, I've never seen you so miserable in your whole life. But again, it's like you learn so much about your body. Your body goes through so many changes. It's actually insane. And again, like really when like the baby starts moving and you just start like, I'm clearly showing at this point, and it's just, that part is really, really beautiful. And just being able to produce a child and kind of bring it into this life, I think I'm super honored to do that. And I'm hoping that the rest of the pregnancy goes really well. Now that I'm not itchy anymore, people would always ask me while I was itchy, they're like, what cravings are you having? And I'm like, my only craving is to not itch. Like I cannot think about anything else. I just don't want to itch. But now that I'm way less itchy, I have had regular cravings of just like fruit, like a lot of fruit, a lot of watermelon and strawberries, as well as like fermented or pickled things like sauerkraut and pickled carrots and pickled onions. Like those are the things that I really gravitate towards. And speaking of that, as far as like baby preparation, we've done nothing pretty much at all to prepare for this child. And part of that was also like mentally, we were like, what is our situation going to be? We've been told these like really scary things. And we kind of just had this mental inhibition where we're like, do we even prepare for this? We don't know what the worst case scenario is going to be. But now that we have such positive results, we're feeling just so much better about it. And the only preparation we've done up until this point is planting a bunch of berries. So we planted a new strawberry garden, which I'll post a picture of on Patreon. We've planted blackberries and blueberries and raspberries. But now we're actually going to get going on the nursery so that we can actually start getting ready for it. So I will say that although in the beginning it was difficult not to use cannabis every day, I mentioned it was almost like kind of losing a friend in a sense. As you move on through pregnancy, it does become a lot easier. At least for me, it did. Where even for like medical reasons, I haven't had a migraine since the first trimester, so I haven't needed to consume pretty much at all. I'll still smell flower because weed is beautiful. It's an amazing plant, and I still love to smell it and still love to touch it. I'll even roll up for some of my friends if they don't know how to roll. But yeah, I haven't really been consuming, and it gets just a lot easier to be around and to just appreciate the plant for what it is. I'm still growing this year. I'm growing more one-to-one varieties, CBD, THC. I'm growing a CBG dominant variety, and then a couple type 1 THC dominant, because I know that my tolerance is going to be literally on the ground when it comes time to deliver this baby, which originally my due date was early September, but knowing that I'll probably need to be induced at least a few weeks early, it'll probably be in August at some point, which don't make fun of me, but another mental battle I had was I was originally like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have a Virgo baby. Yay. Like, that's so great. I love Virgos. And then when that new due date was introduced, I was now in Leo category. And no hate to the Leos out there, but I was like, oh my gosh, Leos are just like a handful. And this is coming from a Gemini. You know, June 1st is my birthday, just a couple days after this podcast will air. And Geminis and Leos are like fire and fire. I know because I've dated a couple Leos in my life, but you know, we also just got a new Pope Leo. So that was like, again, I pay attention to way too many signs in life. And I was like, okay, Pope Leo, that's a sign that Leo is a good thing. This is all going to work out. Baby's going to be a Leo. Everything's going to be fine. And speaking of that, you know, I'm not a religious person, but I have a lot of religious people in my life, whether that's grandparents putting us on the prayer list or a good friend, Catherine Sidman, who's very religious. You know, she's been praying for us, and just like that means so much to us, even though we are not religious. Just knowing that whatever God, whatever manifestation you use, like people have been putting their energy towards us healing. Like that, again, speaking of friendship, speaking of community, I just like, I'm so touched by that. And it just makes me feel so good about where we are and about just our community that we have. So thank you to everyone who supported throughout this journey. It is definitely a challenging journey, but I have truly enjoyed it. And I'm super thankful for everyone who's part of our lives and who has supported us. If you have additional questions on my personal journey, feel free to drop them either in the YouTube comments or on Spotify or Patreon. And as I mentioned, there are going to be follow-up episodes with a neuroscientist who's going to talk more about kind of the women's first perspective and understanding the neuroscience associated with this. I want to have an episode on cannabis and fertility, cannabis and breastfeeding, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to have more on these topics because I genuinely don't think we talk about it enough. We don't talk about women's health enough. We don't talk about the balance between the mom's health and the baby's health. So I'm excited to continue the conversation. But I think that will wrap up this episode. Hopefully I didn't ramble on too much, but that happens when I'm by myself with a microphone. So thank you for listening, and shout out to all of the moms out there, especially the canna moms, especially the cannabis consumers who are navigating this space of becoming a new mom. It is a very difficult place to be in, but I'm sure that whatever you're doing, you are making the right decision for you and your baby because you understand your body the best. And I'm proud of you for doing whatever you're doing. So, thank you again for listening. Mad love. And we will see you in a couple weeks with Dr. Michelle Ross to continue on this topic.